Would you vote for a bin? Not an actual bin, a man dressed as a bin. This is Jonathan Harvey, who has stood at a number of elections as Count Binface. He stood against Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak. He stood in the Makerfield by-election recently against Andy Burnham. And if you live in Clacton, you might get a chance to vote for him soon. He's intending to stand against Nigel Farage in the by-election that's just been confirmed. And he might be one of the only other candidates. Nigel Farage wants this to be a big by-election about his future, but the other main parties have said they're not going to stand, leaving Count Binface.
Help me! Help me!
Welcome to Clacton in the year 2046.
This is a real shithole, Doctor. What fucking happened?
Well, Steve, Nigel won and then went on to win a general election, but his government failed and the Greens took over with Labour.
What the fuck?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
They are not regular Dalek, are they, Doctor?
No, they are phallic neck Daleks. They used to be Reform voters, but when Nigel fucked up, they switched to the Greens and Labour. As you can see, the neck resembles a phallus, and the head, of course, is a dickhead. These are troubled Daleks.
What can we do to help them, Doctor?
We need to go back to the year 2026, where they held a by-election. Only Count Binface can stop Nigel and prevent this from happening.
Right you are, Doctor.
Come on, England! Come on, England!
Quickly!
We need your help. Can't you see I'm trying to watch the game?
This is important. England needs you now more than ever. You must content the Clacton by-election. Otherwise, we will be damned to a future of hell.
Okay, I think that I can do it. Let me finish my beer first.
There's a good Binface! I am very certain that the residents of Clacton shall vote for me again. I am their saviour and their only hope. If it wasn't for me, then the pier wouldn't be standing.
The doctor sent me to change the course. Mr. Nigel, you'll no longer be needed here in Clacton.
Clacton. Welcome to the shit show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is David Coe.
And my name is Joe Augustin. Good afternoon and welcome once again. The Shit Show, which is only on every Friday afternoon, and it's the only program that's brave enough to ask whether the world's being run by a tactically brilliant manager or a man yelling at the linesman from the technical area. It's 3 p.m., the whistle's gone, and once again, the news cycle is serving up the sort of performance that suggests that nobody's been really training. And the defense is all over the place. And the goalkeeper decided that today is the day to take up interpretive dance. So let's get into the highlights, because if the global order insists on playing like this, the least we can do is offer some decent color commentary from the sidelines. And what a week it's been. Trump finding yet another way to make the World Cup about himself. Belgium doing the very unglamorous but highly effective thing of playing like a team that understands structure. And the whole political class behaving like they've just been shown a second yellow and are now arguing with the referee about the concept of rules. Marine Le Pen has managed the legal equivalent of a VAR decision that somehow still leaves her on the pitch, while Count Binface, who you just saw, is out there campaigning in the heat with more dignity than most of the establishment combined. Now, at this point, the tournament table is nonsense. The fixtures are absurd, and the pundits are left explaining why every big name keeps making a complete hash of it. So today, you're keeping your eye out on the funniest possible parts of a deeply unserious world: the own goals, the red cards, the desperate tactical fouls, and the odd moment when someone actually looks like they know what they're doing. So with everything to play for, welcome to the Shit Show, the round of 16.
Yeah. And we've got one more show next week, and then we're going to have a break because we need to. But we think that, David, you are demonstrating extreme heat impacts in real time with your computer overheating. So, yeah, good fun, huh?
Absolutely. My laptop's going berserk. I've moved to what's the coolest, darkest place in the house in an effort to kind of cope with the heat weather and the weather. And of course, there are people around the world who live with this as the norm. So, it just shows the difference in the fact that a developed and established wealthy country like the UK in the middle of its capital city, London, how it is, as a built environment in terms of its fantastic infrastructure, totally incapable of coping with just a little spike in heat.
Yeah. So how hot is it there today? Are you at the beginning of the next heat wave, or is it already here?
I think we are kind of. It's actually been pretty continuous from the way that I'm experiencing it. So it's not really worth talking about it in terms of sort of like a heat wave of coming and then there's a fading and so on. It's just basically been fairly continuous. It's been around 30 degrees. If you're out in the sun, it obviously feels more. A couple of days ago, my wife and I were at Wimbledon watching Arthur Ferry. Absolutely fantastic game, but it meant we were in the heat, in the direction of the sun all throughout. So we were in the heat for about 4 or 5 hours, and there are people who work like that, and we were just sitting there. I had an umbrella up and down to get some shade. But I've only realized over the past few days it's completely exhausted my body. I drank so much liquid without necessarily realizing it, and obviously it has a toll, even though you can't face it. It has a toll on your whole, kind of heart, your respirations, your alertness, ability to get up and do things. And, as I said, we are having it easy here in the UK. Other countries are 10 degrees above this.
Exactly.
And what I've always said, and I think, the point about all this is it crosses lanes. It makes your productivity go down. Productivity is not normally that dependent on what happens to the weather. So it crosses lanes of how the economy works and how the weather functions. And it changes. And that's what makes everything really exciting from perspective of kind of shit happening in that way, but also worrying. And that's what the shit show is about.
Just passing our regards to Richard, who can't be with us today. He can explain next week if he can join us. And we were trying to get our stonemason Ollie to join us, who's based in the UK. He's our emergency co-host when we need one. But he's been out working in the heat for the last week, and he basically said he just needs to just rest and recover. So, so he's not sitting around watching the tennis. He's carving stone. So it's a real impact, and some of the data on the productivity of employees is really interesting. In fact, I was reading Mercer. Basically, 4% of companies have data on how extreme weather events impact their companies, like worldwide supply chain included. 4%. And that, don't you think that's shocking? That's where we are right now.
Yeah, I think. It's one of those things that is kind of invisible to everybody, right? I think we have not. The UK has had heat waves before, but they were always very short and sharp and kind of done with. This one's prolonged and protracted. Yeah. And I think it's interesting for me how I've got enough friends from the UK, people who've gone there as well, who know that hot days can be terrible in the UK. But it does seem that structurally things haven't really changed to accommodate that yet, right? It's just like one of those things where it's like seen as it's the 2 or 3 days that happen every year. It's often the subject of a joke as well, right? What do you call a sunny day in the UK? What's a sunny day?
Yeah. But this Mercer data wasn't just for extreme heat. It was for all extreme weather. So only 4% of companies have data on the impact on employees from extreme weather events. That's typhoons, hurricanes, fire, floods, everything. So I found that really shocking. And you think about life in Singapore, where it's hot all year round, and we're having an exceptionally hot year now. But we go from air-conditioned environment to air-conditioned environment. The amount of times, if I walk up to the shops in the middle of the day, I'm so sweaty. Even when we go for a walk, it's sort of 6, 7 o'clock at night. It's pretty revolting. But we can go from air conditioning environment to air conditioning environment. You think you get in a black cab in London and it's like being in a sauna. You know, there's just no relief. If you ask the cabbie to turn the aircon on, they're like, what?
Yeah, no, I think both of these are really kind of interesting things. I think I'd like to say that, you know, I've been in the UK for the majority of my life, and this heat has a different feel to it to previous heat waves. There is kind of an intensity and kind of feeling a little bit more being oppressed about it than before. And I've been noticing it as well. I mean, you know, in a sense, right, you know, the UK is famous for having grey clouds. I had a friend from South Africa who I was working with, and was saying he really loved working in the country because he had clouds, whereas he used to work in South Africa in Witwatersrand, and it's blue sky all the time, and he hates it after a while. But that's what the UK has become. And so there is no kind of natural cloud cover to shelter any of those things, and the heat becomes extremely intense.
So there's even less cloud.
There is definitely cloud now today in the UK than there were a decade ago, than there were when I was in school, kind of university and things. You used to be able to look up in the summer, there would always be some sort of clouds floating over. But now it's complete clear in that way. Yeah. So there's definitely an aspect of that heat.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Jan Omsons talks about a lot. The declining cloud cover is a part of the Earth's energy imbalance, right? Because there's less to reflect the heat back out. So yeah, that's interesting. God, I can't even imagine London without clouds. It was such a grey, miserable place when I lived there.
and the other part of this is actually what you just mentioned about the data. Is this crossing lanes? And that's the point. I wrote just before the show a post about Edward Lorenz's paper, which is the one that triggered the butterfly effect, description of the butterfly effect. And he talks about, can flap of a butterfly's wing in Brazil cause a tornado in Texas? He's a weather systems guy, he's a meteorologist, and he knows it can't. It can't because the weather system in the northern hemisphere rotates differently to the one in the southern hemisphere. So he's actually asking a much deeper question. He's asking, when can it do that? When can things cross lanes in that way?
I saw a piece on the AMOC is impacting the Asian monsoon. So but then the AMOC sort of goes down into the southern hemisphere as well, right? So
well, the AMOC goes all the way around the globe. That's the reason for the concern, because it goes all the way around the globe, and along the way it becomes a temperature current, a salinity current, a nutrient current, and so on across in that way. But the aspect of it is when the lanes are crossed, when the weather system crosses into the economic system. So the weather we typically treat as going in the weather lanes, the economy we treat as going in the economy lanes, the politics we treat as going in the politics lanes. When they start crossing over, that's when you get the cascades. That's when you get the real effects. And that's what he was talking about. And he wrote in the paper along, you know, hypothetically, the butterfly wing has a much greater spread when it's in turbulent wind than in calm wind. It's when we have these turbulence. And he states that, he says it's not proven, but that's what it is. And that's exactly the sort of thing that when the small effects can't Binface, you know, screaming lost such was always around. To what extent is can't Binface just something that's always around, but now different in that way, is whether the environment is in that turbulence. So that's to create that, and we are in that. And then the part of that his work spurred, which is deterministic chaos, is when can things be predicted? When can system be predicted to be chaotic? You can't predict the chaos, but you can tell if a system has become chaotic. And that's when the boundaries between the lanes become eroded. Those boundaries that attract things to one state versus another, they start disappearing off. And that's kind of what's happening globally. So that's where the effect
AKA the polycrisis.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it's doing. So in a sense, whilst those boundaries are being eroded, everything still carries on as normal. We still feel everything is unchanged. But because they are not there, we don't know what can flip it, but it can. Yeah. And that's why the polycrisis becomes more than a polycrisis. It becomes actually catastrophic as a signal, as an indicator of something catastrophic.
Right,
I'm just glad that we're starting off with something light today.
Yes.
Well, that's what we're here for. All right, so obviously the big sort of early news of the week, and there's been so many. It's when you go back to the beginning of the week or the last show and move forward, a lot happens, and we don't discuss all of it. And we definitely don't get time to discuss all of it. But we've got no guest today, which we like sometimes because it gives us a little bit more space to dig into what's been going on. But obviously the whole red card, Belgium versus US soccer football game, sort of there was some interesting conversations. There was some fun conversations. There was a lot of anger. I pay as little attention to it as possible, but anyone want to sort of talk about what jumped out?
I mean, it's disgraceful. It's the worst thing you can do. It's just, for all the talk about how sports mustn't have politics. So for all the talk about, incidentally, Russia is now back into the 2028 Olympics. I saw that. And because of the war in Ukraine, but evidently it's no longer an issue. And it came just about the time of the red card being kind of cancelled in that way. And this is one of the things, it's important because it has those consequences. It has those implications about where the lanes are. And as you remove the lanes, then you do not know what the hell can happen after that. Football has enough trouble with the amount of wealth that's in it. For a billionaire to go along and say to, the head of FIFA and the quiet conversation, evidently, that just goes along and says, why don't we just cancel a red card for an obvious foul decision by the referee? And this is the important thing. The whole point about football is that there are these things which are erratic about it. And we've lost that. It's about, being sportsmanlike. Being sportsmanlike is not about being fair and precise about everything. It's about accepting things as they are. Sometimes it goes for you, sometimes it goes against you. Sometimes you push the boundaries and sometimes it pushes against you back, whichever way around it is. But being sportsmanlike is to be able to accept that and get on with it. And that is the one thing which you can say Trump doesn't do. He denies his election loss. He denies what's going on in Middle East. He denies his failing policy and everything. But the essence of it is everybody somehow goes along with it because we all believe, we all accept still. We're still staying in the lane that what the president says has got to be right. They're crossing it, we're staying in it.
I don't know about that.
As far as the world is concerned, people should be up in arms about it, but they're not. There should be a lot more. There should be a lot more disobedience across the world. But
yeah. Right. Okay, I get that. Joe, what do you reckon? Because you're probably a little bit more of a soccer viewer than us, I think.
Well, first of all, those are fighting words. I hardly watch sports. I'm watching the World Cup, and for me, this is actually more a farce in terms of diplomacy, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that you can do a back alley kind of some back. You can use back channels and try and cause something to happen because technically speaking, this particular foul, when reviewed, there was enough controversy over whether it was an absolute foul. So it's one of those things where in VAR review, it looks quite terrible, but when you look at it in real time, you can see how this is one of those things that could be totally unintentional. So the question is, what it could have been reviewed in the background and said, okay, we will reverse that decision. It could have been the way the story went. And that's how diplomacy usually works. You usually don't have someone then coming out to say that, well, what I did was.
But the point is,
and I don't even know what a red card is, right?
The point here is that this is football. The decision of the referee is final. This is the point. And the point here is this is how it crosses the lanes in that way, because it's saying no decision is final. And when you have a situation in the world where you then go along and say, well, no decision is final, it's what we can measure, what we can show, whatever it is, you can always make up something else with it. There's a great TV series in the UK, by the way, called The Capture. You really must watch it. It's in 3 series, and hopefully there'll be another one coming. And it's about how the inability for us to be able to trust whatever video evidence there is. So in this case, the whole video evidence could be completely doctored by the time it's reviewed along in that way. And aside,
I understand that. But I mean, I watched it live, so I was, I had I was looking to see what the rules were, and I was trying to figure things out. And I actually thought that they might actually review it after the game, because it's one of those things where you can actually make a decision. And there is actually, and people don't realize this, but it's actually regularly done that red cards are suspended. Like at the beginning of the World Cup, for instance, most of the players come in with their red cards and other bookings suspended, so that the game or the tournament sort of has a fresh start as well. So it's not completely without precedent, although it has not been done mid-tournament where something has been reviewed
it is completely without precedent. The president of the United States goes along and receives a red card on the basis of a game that he didn't even watch, and goes along and makes the statements that he does. Is an act alone that completely destroys the whole spirit of football. Whatever you may say about in arguments about it, the surprising thing, the lack of disobedience, is the fans and the players to say, you know what, we're not playing. This is one of those cases where you go along and say, F you. You know what, this is our game, not your game. You don't even play it. Your teams are crap.
I'd hate to be Balogun, that's how you say his name. Can you imagine going out in the field that day? So Marina Hyde wrote a really great piece in The Guardian, and there were just a couple of zingers that I thought were worth sort of highlighting. The last time this many people cheered on the Belgian resistance, it was 1914. She called it White Housery. Then Trump really wet his depends over Balogun's ban. I don't know what that meant. Infanto defends FIFA's integrity. Sorry, FIFA's what? And another one was bring back Blatter, who of course was the last president of FIFA who got done on corruption charges or something too, right? But the interesting thing about what's his name, the guy Infantino, is he's got the world in his palm, So the Europeans can say whatever they want. He's won over the Middle East and the Americas, and and of course the other game that's getting a lot of attention is the Egypt Argentinian game, and there's some really interesting conversations about that. But but I think in this case the point was a US president stepped in, and if the referees wanted to decide to change the red card, that's a different story. But,
there's always controversy in the game. There's always a penalty that shouldn't be a penalty. There's even Messi, not Messi, the other guy, Maradona, with his hand of God. A clear handball along with it, and it was allowed, and it became the winning, goal that came along through. And he describes it in his interview as the hand of God. It was the hand of God that did it. He accepted it was a handball in that way. But the point is, that's the game. For a president to go along with it, there are things which are not right, which are not fair, but that is life. That is why the game is interesting. It's because it's not made to a kind of...
All right, David, you're breaking up a lot. Joe, do you want to have any final thoughts before we move on from this one?
I think we're talking way too much about football.
Exactly.
It's one of those things for me when I had discussions with my father about justice. My father was a magistrate, and he taught me about how there is the law and there is justice, and there's how justice needs to be seen to be done. The natural assumption here is President Trump made the request and therefore it happened. There is little being said in terms of the process to say other things happened, or it was otherwise, or it was the referees were brought back to have a look at it, and all that process, all of that hasn't been taken into account. They haven't tried to do any of that, which is a bit of a pity, really, because that's the plausible thing about this. The whole thing about, like even our justice system or our laws, it is always about it's always about justice being seen to be done. So when you make a decision, you need to make your points about why it makes sense. So when a judge says something or decides something that is not easily understood, or at least not easily supported by the public, they do have to make the case of it, right? And then because it's the way judgments are made. So in this particular case, just because it was oversimplified, and just because you have someone who does not understand the nuance of it, like it could have been something that it could have been a win, in the sense that if you did not have the president of the United States coming to say that I tried to intervene in this game, and a game that I had no idea about, and even a concept I don't know anything about, and tried to claim that it was his work that resulted in it, this could have been a win. It could have been spun into something where you go like, well, you know what? We also look at the review and we've seen that, and everybody saw the footage, and this is what we think. It could end up being, a bit of a precedent as well in terms of how fouls are looked at, because I think what's happening now with the game as well is that the VAR component is changing the way the game is played quite a bit. How far back they roll back on a VAR sometimes to also make a judgment about the situation. So there's some standards being changed. It's not all terrible. But I can also feel very much for those who go like, it's not like what it used to be, because I mean, I watched the Maradona goal and never liked it, never have come around to liking it. And for me, when especially there is the ability for everyone to have seen it, and I mean that was a time for VAR to be around, but and there's a reason why VAR has eventually become a thing. Right? Because it used to be adamantly pushed away. It was one of those things that said that it was not part of the game. It's not the way things work. And now what happens is it's almost every shot at Wimbledon now is played back. If you look at it on the screens, not on TV, but if you look at it, what's happening on screen, on the screens on location, they actually do play back and verify the shots going in or out. And that sort of thing happens. And I'm not completely against the idea that if it was in, it was in. I think there's nothing wrong with that,
It takes away though. We're not going to talk about it anymore, right? We're going to move on. Because you just said, Joe, that we're talking too much about it. Then you talked a lot more about it. So let's move on.
I was speaking about justice. I was speaking about the principles of justice.
Marine Le Pen, of course, who is head of the sort of far right movement in France. So they've got a presidential election next year. So she was convicted of misuse of EU funds. It's all been backdated. She can now run for the president, but she has to wear an ankle bracelet for the next 12 months. And she said that she wouldn't campaign with an ankle bracelet on. But the interesting thing is Jordan Bardella, who's the young guy that she brought in as her sort of, underling, he's potentially going to be put forward, and he's quite popular. But he's in a relationship with an Italian princess. And first of all, I didn't know that there were Italian princesses anymore, but I'm sure they still are. But what's interesting about it is by being with an Italian princess, it sort of goes against the whole elites message. So that's another little story that's sort of in the edges of this. But yeah, Marine Le Pen. Do you think? I mean, from what you're saying, I mean, they're popular. The French going far right, it's a bit shocking to me, but anything's possible these days.
Well, I mean, I just like to point out that, America was founded by criminals. I mean, that's the nature of that situation. There is the rebels are breaking the rules. So to an extent, this is similar.
Yeah. All right.
I think the French politics has for a long time now been in this kind of I don't know. It's basically been shifting towards the two extremes, right? The far left and the far right, along with it, and it has and this is just another path towards that. I think fundamentally, what we're not addressing at all is the ability for politics to function.
Yeah.
And as a political party, whatever you are in government, there's a set of expectations that people want of you. And the commonality between the far left and the far right is they both expect the government to deliver more of what they want for them. That makes the politics actually unable to function because the resources to be able to deliver is being drained away.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty. That's the fundamental conflict. So you flip-flop between far left and far right, between Count Binface and Nigel Farage, used to be Grimmy Lord Such or whatever it is. But the thing that's actually becoming increasingly different from the time before is that the ability to have the revenues for the government to increase, to be able to finance it, is disappearing. And different governments in different parts of the world face this in different ways. The Americans typically go down to say we must make the government smaller.
Yeah.
The French often say that too. But in effect, it gets bigger. So they say one thing, they can't deliver it because ultimately their voters expect something back. That needs the government to become bigger. So
well, as long as they've got voters, right?
As long as they've got voters, but as long as they still, whoever gets in power has voters, right? So
no, as far as the authoritarian switch, when
which is the thing that then happens. If your politics cannot deliver in that way, then the person who wins becomes an authoritarian.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with Roger Hallam. I don't know if you guys ever listen to him or read what he's sharing. Right, he's out there. But he did an interview with Climate Glenn, and basically he was talking about this. He's saying, look, the reality is, as we move forward, he's like saying 4 billion people are going to die from climate extremes, and he's been saying it for years, and he's been laughed at for years. But I agree with him. And he's saying, but the politics is it's going to be extreme right or extreme left, and that's it. And there's nothing in between. And when you kind of listen to him, it's like that's where I've been sort of thinking for a really long time. But my focus is how do we get the centre strong again, so that we can work together. Because the extremes aren't going to take us anywhere good.
No, but the problem is how do we get expectation down of what governments can do?
That's all part of the story, right? Yeah.
If you don't do that, it doesn't matter who gets in there. And what happens is when I talk to people who are in the centre, they're full of expectation of what the government should do.
Yeah.
And I was at an event at the on Tuesday, a Citizens UK event, which is a great group for organising people to do things in that way, mobilising individuals, schools, parishes, communities in those things. And they are full of very, kind of very clear-sighted people in terms of what's good for the community, what's good for people in that way. And this was a group where there was a group of schools from around the country talking about things that they do. Some of them address homelessness in a really personal way because the kids are homeless, in schools. They are homeless. And so they have an insight that's actually not way beyond what the politician on the pulpit talks about, because they're the one who's trying to do their work, study, whilst shifting from location to location every other week in that way. And there was this group who was talking about having affordable bus fare so they can get to school. But this is in the UK.
Yeah.
This was in Oxford, right? This is not a village in Kenya where the school is 20 kilometers away. Here in the UK, the school is 20 kilometers away, and the bus fare is unaffordable. And so they can't really get to it, and that stuff's in that way too. And I was talking to them, and ultimately it goes down to, well, somehow the governments need to finance it. The aspect of us that's challenging is say, well, how can you create the livelihoods so that you can actually allow that to become financed? It's outside of their imagination.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with our approach towards politics. We think it's about someone doing something for us. And that's going to fail, because if someone ends up not being able to do something for us, we are mentally unable to conceive of ourselves being able to do something for ourselves.
No. It's a really interesting. We're up for a revolution. But I think, but then at the same time, I'm sitting out in a different part of the world that operates in a different way, where it is a top-down approach, and the majority of people are taken care of. Not everyone, but there's a small percentage that get missed, but the majority of people are being taken care of, and there's enormous trust in the government here.
Yes.
But even in countries like India, there's a much stronger trust in the government, right? So there's Western democracy, and then there's other ways of doing things, and there's the collectivism culture versus the individualistic culture. There's a lot of different things at play. And sometimes when I listen to like Roger when he talks, I think there's a Western conversation that's happening around the world that dominates all the airways, and they don't look at the other ways that you can do things that also work. How to manage a pandemic. Look at Singapore.
Say Asia, even though a lot of it looks like a top-down government, has a lot more kind of regional communities and regional self-governance around. Yes. Indonesia is a massive country, but the different regions, because it's like 1,000 archipelago islands kind of thing, have a lot of that communal self-governance that goes on in there. And different parts of Asia, even different villages around in different places. So definitely there are huge models that can be carried over that needs to be looked at. But what's happening with something like climate change happening is that the financing is saying the governments need now all to be centralized along, because they're all looking for $1.3 trillion from one source, and that's going to allocate it according to the plan of how it is, that they're going to say how it is. And as a result, and of course, the people who say how it is are the people who are going to ultimately give the money, because he who pays the piper calls the tune. And so we are actually allowing ourselves to lose all the regionality that we have by actually
originality.
No, the regionality, the ability for regions to operate as what they are, for communities in the local areas to conceive of how they can create their own livelihoods and what it means for them.
But why do you think that's happening, say, in a region like Asia? I don't think it's happening at all. I think the risk in this region is the economic impact in the coming years, especially some of the data is on GDP impact of things like the El Nino. But when I was in Phuket during the pandemic and there was no money, I watched people go back to the land. I watched them go back to the ocean. I watched them sustain themselves, right? Because they are closer to that than say, my grandmother, who died 10 years ago at 104. She used to garden, but my mother never touched a garden, right? So there's generations in this part of the world that are closer to the memory and the actual doing of gardening and taking care of themselves and feeding themselves. Singapore's a bit of a different place because it's so much smaller, but so like when there's a massive national disaster, people will clean it up and get on with it. They don't hang around sitting in a mobile home a year later going, I haven't been taken care of. That's not the way this region sort of works.
Well, I think it begins to fail because of the effects are now more global in that sense alone. It's the climate that are driving a lot of these things.
Yeah, and there's more of it. Yeah.
And if I look at sort of a conversation I had with the community, someone who have been working for quite a while in trying to see how can we create kind of a different thinking about water in a region without water. The community leaders ends up having a view of saying, if we fix this ourselves, then NGOs won't come. We think the NGOs should come and pay us and repair the damage that climate has been caused by all these things. So you need a very different perspective. You need to be able to preserve what you're talking about, but as things get tougher and more difficult, then people who can go and farm is finding, as you've talked, kind of it's too hot to grow rice or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So you end up falling into a dependency. So that's the trap that we're leaning towards. And at the same time, The message that's coming along is not about how you become able to change to how the climate's coming, to the environment and all those things are coming. It's a message that's confused. It's still very much a message of saying, here is how we can keep to 1.5 degrees. You know, that's a totally lost. But the UN consistently says that's what we can do. The major environment groups consistently say that's what we can do. Listen to people like Johan Rockström. He goes along and says how we can still keep to 1.5 degrees. I mean, that sort of thing pushes all the funding and all the ideas towards some big solution, some magic solution. That promise of the magic solution takes that ability for people to claim back their own agency, say, life's shit, the game hasn't gone our way, effing red card. What are we going to play? What are we going to do? To say, come on, Trump, cancel the red card, cancel the weather, it'll be fine, bring us back what we had before. All the people who talk about overshoot and coming back, how are we going to overshoot? And that'll be all right, we'll come back down to it. We'll get the temperatures back down. Totally misunderstands when you mix paint, you can't unmix it.
No, that's a thousands of years solution. I like the mixed paint. So we've got James Atkin joining us. So you're saying same in Romania. So countries that are not just like the difference. What you're talking about, David, is mass rice failures. That is going to result in global famine, and we're on the cusp of that. Even though most people aren't even talking about it, because it's 40 degrees when that's the temperature when rice starts to fail. So more than 60% of the world's population relies on rice as a staple. Now, a person living in Thailand isn't going to grow their own rice, but they won't be able to afford to buy it either, because the food inflation, unless like India did a few years ago, was they stopped the export of certain types of rice, so they kept the costs down for the people in their country. So it's going to be messy. It's going to be messy. But the dependency on aid that you were talking about, the most resilient people I've ever known are in the global south.
Yes, absolutely, and I absolutely agree, and that's why the whole climate language is completely wrong. You look at any official thing from the climate kind of agenda, it talks about how the global south needs to be looked after by the global north. It's the other way around.
Well,
but the people
a lot of the food's coming from this part of the world.
But the people who write that are part of a group that somewhere along has this thing that says we need more money from the global north, and that money gets into their extra flat in London or New York and wherever else that might go to in that way, and some may trickle down to something else. You have all sorts of issues about the whole dependency on thinking is money. What you're talking about is that the communities there face it and independent. What James's comment about Romania talks about is how people do that. They do that in situations where they don't have that expectancy of help from someone coming along. But the whole agenda is about building a dependency, building a psychology of dependency. You need someone to fix climate change for you.
Yeah, but I think
you need to depend on someone to do other things.
Yeah, but so this is one of the conversations where I'm always like, I'm not sure where people are going with it, right? Because so for example, we know that mass migration creates social chaos. So keeping people where they are is really important for any country's stability and security in the long term. So number one, keeping people where they are is in everyone's interest, including the people who want to stay at home, right? Number two, everyone's talking about the amount of fossil fuels that are being used in countries like China, India, Indonesia, right? So if the world doesn't want that to increase, how can the world come together to make sure that sustainable energy grows explosively in those countries? Well, China's already taking the lead there. India's ramping up. Indonesia is very much investing in coal at the moment. But how do we get sustainable energy? Infrastructure so that people can survive in extreme heat events. That's going to be a critical thing. Do we need to be digging underground so that people have got a place to go to cool down? That sort of thing. But it doesn't matter if people survive underground. If the crop's not surviving, the people aren't surviving. And if the crops aren't surviving, then the whole world gets impacted because we're in a global food supply chain. So the idea that the North shouldn't be investing in the South, maybe it's the way it's positioned that you're talking about that to me is wrong. But there is an investment that needs to be made globally to do everything we can to try and turn things around. And
but the essence of it, the difference of it, first of all, is that the migration is happening. So the people I know who have wealth are spending their time between countries according to where it is the best weather, temperature, whatever that they can have.
Yeah.
It's just that it's the wealthy people migrating along. They've become like wildebeests. And they do that in part to avoid paying tax in any jurisdiction, and also to take advantage of the fact that they can move from place to place. When it gets too hot here, they move over to the next part and move over to that. So that's happening. So the issue
about 6 months ago, the Indian embassy, the American embassy in Delhi, wasn't taking even people, the wealthy people's bribes to let them in to get overseas. So yes, it is, but there's going to be a point where it stops. But those wealthy people who are swanning around, not paying their taxes, not contributing to their societies at home, might have a nice little penthouse in or an underground bunker in New Zealand.
The point is this isn't about having one bunker. This is about
multiple choices, right?
This is about a migratory pattern of living. And part of it is taxes, and the other part of it is climate.
Yeah.
They're moving around to find the climatic environment that suits them at that particular time of year. That's what's going on.
I got it. I know lots of them, especially living in Phuket.
They move around and they go, and then they close their house up here, they move on to the next thing, and so on. The aspect of mass migration, the thing we're getting wrong with it is to think how it's bad for us at the moment, so we must prevent it, to recognizing that actually we won't have a say over this.
Yes.
The human hubris is to think that somehow we control what will happen. If the conditions get to the conditions where people are going to migrate along, the reason why the wildebeests have this amazing mass migration that people want to build their luxury hotels over to watch, by the way, which they're doing, right? Is because the rain and the grassland and the weather conditions changes over the year or the years, and they simply move around in that way. And that's how the pastoral communities have developed over time. They moved along with them in that way. And you go along and you take that into the situation at the moment. What it actually calls for is a completely different way of thinking about national boundaries.
Yes.
We cannot have national boundaries in the world where the climates are changing because the lanes have moved. Look at what's happening with the situation in India and Pakistan over the Indus River Treaty.
Yeah.
You cannot have national boundaries when we are bounded by the geography and the climate.
Yeah, which are all human
lines that we
made,
drew,
right? Yeah.
Those fantastic straight lines that we drew along that defines the boundaries. Look at Africa. How many of the boundaries in Africa are straight?
Yeah, so it's caused a lot of problems, right? But the other thing that I'm saying, David, is you're talking about the migrants, the rich migrants, right? Which, good luck to them. But they're not the people that you want in your community down the track. You want the people who know how to grow food. You want the people who know how to do things with their hands, and they're not able to cross borders.
Right. So you have this problem with the national boundaries, and if you then look at what's been coming in terms of financing for adaptation, for mitigation, it is to sustain and maintain the national boundaries. You take a look at the situation of the islands in Pacific and the small islands and saying they're losing their livelihoods, they're losing their land, they're already being flooded along. What's being done is to keep them there. We're not asking, here are great talents, Where can we be? How can we be around together? How can we move around the globe as organisms as we would otherwise? Look at what the mosquitoes is doing. The mosquito isn't staying around. It's gone off to Iceland.
Yeah.
It isn't going around and says, you know what, I'm just going to hang around here because there's a passport requirement over there.
Yeah, but so we need to get ready. We need to get ready to, you know, it's the normal, it's the pre-civilization mode of humanity, which was migration.
Right, but that's the mindset that we're not actually moving ourselves to. It's a mindset of change.
Yes.
And it's not random change. It's change as what we are, understanding our own particular mission and purpose so that we're not just swayed by whatever Trump may say or someone else may say.
Yeah.
Along with that. Instead, what we're told is listen to what they say. So you get this flip-flopping of politics from one end to the other. We got voters who vote one end and then next time they vote the other because they're fed up with this one, so they're going to try the other one. It's about us being what we are and allowing ourselves to change.
Yeah.
And that's where the investment comes in, because the investments, when you really look at what the investments do, it's about making money. It's not about actually allowing people to claim back their own agency to thrive. It's about making money.
Yeah.
That's why it reestablishes borders. That's why it reestablishes to try to maintain the status quo. But the status quo isn't going to last.
And the longer we wait, and so I think it's Nico saying, "What's the solution, David?" And there's loads of them. What do you want to say to that, David?
I think if you're looking for saying what's the solution, you're already asking the wrong thing. What are you going to do for yourself, knowing that you have to change? So what is it that you are? What is it that really motivates you? How do you create a livelihood out of that? That's what my 6-step program is about. How do you then engage that with the world so that people can reward you as what you are, build up your livelihood, and you go from there. If you don't start from there and you say, what's the solution? Because people do that and they think of the solution somehow for the big picture for everybody along. The only part we need to do for the big picture is to leave oil and gas and coal in the ground. Once you do that, if you are able to draw a line in the sand on that, you're going to find, oh, we can't have our fertilizers, so how are we going to grow food? Which is all the questions everybody's saying, oh, you don't need the fertilizers to grow food because nature grows food itself. You're going to go along and says, oh, we don't have the materials to make all the plastics. What are we going to do? Oh, the other side goes and says, oh, you know what? We don't actually need the plastics because you can just use this to wrap your things in and you can just carry it around. We lived perfectly well 30 years ago without any of this crap.
Yeah.
And so you draw the line in the sand in that way and you allow that to come back through into how you do it, into what that is. And that is going to be, you know, I keep coming back, right? The monarch butterfly, the most perfect example of how things are. In one generation, the monarch butterfly flies 5,000 kilometers from Northern California to Mexico, giving this absolutely fantastic spectacle that everybody focuses on and the pictures on it. What they don't talk about is the fact that the return journey takes 3 to 4 generations. Each generation doesn't know where home is. It's guided to it by working together in a relationship with nature. And that relationship changes with each generation because it's in a different part of the world as it goes along through. We are on that return journey home. Where is home? We don't even know. The people who tells you, here's the solution along with that way, this is what it should look like, this is how it is, have no ability to deliver that. Whether they're right in what they say it should be or not, they have no ability to deliver it. The only people with ability is you and what you can do.
All right, so why didn't answer straight away what you just said makes instead of criticizing the question? I didn't really see it as criticizing, more about turning the question on its head, because those sort of questions are really difficult. You know, people say, what can I do? What can I do? And they're always asking these questions, and it doesn't matter what you say. If they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. James, the mindset of international development funding seems a bit about promoting the model of fast fashion shopping malls powered by renewable energy not viable under climate change. Exactly. But you know, we're up for a total revolution. And what I suppose what your essence of your message is, tell me if I've got this wrong, David, is what we all individually need to do is find our own path forward. And then the bigger story, you know, like the migration story. I remember years ago I wrote a blog, what we need to be doing and saying, well, what's the trajectory the Earth is on? If there's a massive strip of the Earth that we can't live on anymore because it's going to become too hot to live, why are we still building on these places and releasing the emissions from that? You know, at some point we have to say, well, this is just chaos, right? Stop. Because we're not even going to be living in these properties. I used to say in Phuket all the time, we're not even going to be living in these properties before either the sea arrives at the front door or it becomes too hot for anyone to live there, which could happen in the next 12 months based on this, the expectation. So we're suffering the emissions of its creation, and we might not even have the benefit of living in these properties. But where will we be able to live? And how do we get as many people as we can who can move to these places to start to build the infrastructure that we're going to need in the future, which is obviously up north, versus spending all this extraordinary amount of money in these regions of the world that are going to be too hot to live. You know, we're seeing it with the data centers. They're suffering from water shortages. They're suffering. Johor Bahru, just across the border in Malaysia. You know, they're building data centers and there's not enough water. And by the way, that's where Singapore gets its water from. So what does that mean for Singapore with its water needs? Is JB gonna, is the Malaysian government gonna go, well, we're not going to fulfill that agreement anymore, Singapore, because we need this water for data centers? And then the local people who are living there, do they have a voice in this? Because of course it's not just water, it's not just heat, it's not just the amount of heat that comes off these data centers. It's not even just the forever chemicals released from these data centers.
I'll give you
who benefits, you know. But we should give Joe a chance to jump in.
Well, I was thinking a little bit about the monarchs and the process for change and how things work. There is a sense of wanting to move things really quickly and solving it now. What's the answer now? What's the answer now? What's the answer now? And the answer, which we may argue whether we have time to get to, is it's going to take some time. Like even with the monarchs, which you talk about what it works, how that works, right? That multi-generational path back to home is not without those who do not make it, right? It is not. It is not a guaranteed trip that you start out on and you go like, we're gonna get there. We're gonna lose some moths along the way, lose some butterflies along the way. And I've always said that we need to have some kind of, unfortunately, the way life works is we get the attention of people when enough people die. I used to say someone's gonna die, and now I think a lot of people have got to die in a way that is undeniable. You got to go like, you know what? That's what happened. And the big issue right now is we can't, even the idea that the evidence is real is hard to prove, because there is the sense that if something happens and you show me the proof of it, the video of it, whatever it is, there's so much distrust built into it that you could just say, no, this is not real. You could figure that it's not real. And that's the kind of thing that's happening over and over again. It's to the extent that you could be even live and in person and see something, and your sense of doubt rises in that moment, even though you're seeing it. Not just a video, not just something else where you can go, there's a layer of deception that could go on top of this. Just being there already now is something which it almost seems like it's not enough.
Yeah.
So we're inoculated against changing our beliefs. We just have to be in some way affected by something where it's undeniable. I think 911, in the moment it happened, why it had the impact it had is because of all the connections that it led to other people as well. People knew people who knew people. It wasn't just a case of like this foreign. I mean, it wasn't just like New York not affecting the rest of the world. It's because of the size of that particular event and how it rippled across it because of connections to other people. That's the sort of thing that really needs to happen. It's almost like we need to have a violent alien invasion for us to go, okay, hang on, we need to do something about, we need to fix ourselves, or even reset and go like, well, some of these things that we're having arguments about maybe aren't even important to have anymore, isn't like, because it's so screwed up, it's so bad that whatever we do here isn't going to make a difference to what tomorrow is anyway. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. I'm hoping.
I think what you're saying, and I think if I take 911 and as that sort of really extreme example, I'm going to have to nip off in a bit because my laptop's running out of battery. Is the fact that it happened in America?
As well, yeah.
Imagine if that happened in Mali. It would have been a blip on the news and gone.
Yeah, there was something unique about 9/11. It's the visuals.
Because it was in America.
Because the connections.
Because it was the skyline and all the rest of it. And if they had kind of bombed, if they've done that in sort of in Khartoum or whatever, it just wouldn't be on the news. It wouldn't have any of the impact that it has. And that's the problem what Andrea's talking about. The people are dying, they are. They're just not in the places where people are going to recognize it.
Yeah.
And that's a really important element to bear in mind in thinking about this, which is, there are three things I'm doing at the moment. One is the Thrive Academy, which is about how you can create a livelihood for yourself, no matter how the world is. Second one is Thrive Points, which is how you can leave oil and gas and coal in the ground and make money doing it. Get a Thrive Point. And the third is what I call We're Always Glad You Came, which are events for you to go and explore the shape of the future you want. Go there with your friends and see if together you can thrive. So that's basically that. They're games that you go and play. And between all of that, it covers what I want to do. The events allow me to make money. The Thrive Academy allows me to learn from others as to how I can thrive. And the Thrive Points allows me to be able to say, there is going to be a line in how much oil and gas and coal will be used. That's all I'm concerned with. All the other thing about changing the world and all those things, other people can do that. But they're not
find your own path.
to go forward. But if I go forward in this way, then I'm connecting with people, building myself the community that I need in a way. And this is a community across everywhere in the world. Talk to people in Malaysia, talk to people in Uganda. I talk to people in the States along in doing all of this. So it's not limited by the national boundaries. That's the whole idea. Don't do things which are limited by the national boundaries or dependent on the UN. Because the UN is like FIFA. Trump is going to come along and says, cancel that.
Don't criticize the UN. I think they do the best job they can. I don't think they've been set up very well to succeed, and they never have been. But I do think they're doing the best job they can. But Joe, you made a point about we're going to lose some moths, right? And this is one of the parts of the story that people struggle with, the acceptance of that. We are going to lose a lot of people. Some scientists say there's only enough space on the planet for 1 billion people to live. That's it. That's the maximum amount of humans, right? And we've got over 8 billion. Roger Hallam's saying 4 billion dead, and some scientists are agreeing that is what's going to happen. That's a hard thing to accept, but it is something I have accepted, and I think it's really part of the story that we all need to be appreciating right now. We are going to lose. I think in the next 12 months. The impacts of this El Nino, we are going to see a lot of loss, and it's going to be very, very difficult for anyone who's got a heart to see the loss, because of course it's going to be the poorest first. But it's not just going to be the poorest. They're talking 20,000 dead in Europe from the last heat wave, right? So it's not just the poorest. It's those who are not in a position where the infrastructure can sustain the changes that are coming. So you see the stuff that's going on in China at the moment. They lost 3 dams. They didn't lose that many people, but they lost 3 dams. That's massive, right? That infrastructure, and that's the water story. And they've got another one on the way. I don't know if it's going to hit the same part of China. I have to look at the maps, but the size of that storm that's it's going to hit the tip of the north of Taiwan, Japan, and then into mainland China. It's enormous. Have you seen the size of the bloody thing?
That's the kind of reporting you need to have on the BBC. That they go like, "Have you seen the size of that bloody thing?"
I think it's important to bring one thing out, and that's if you have a friend, someone who is starting to have feeling a bit faint, having a heart problem or whatever it is, end up going to see a doctor and stuff. That's the heat going on, basically, because we know that. And so it's not all of those catastrophic things. It is happening and it's weakening your body and it's affecting you. By pointing to those other big things, people think they are fine. They're not appreciating what it is that's happening to them now. If you're slightly overweight, you are worse off by a long way because your body has to cope with a lot more. And there's this problem, which is that the mice is able to lose a lot of heat compared to its body size because it has massive body area as a result of it. If you're bigger, there's less area to lose the heat. So you have a harder problem regulating your temperature. And your heart is going to have to pump harder. And you're going to more likely to end up with all kinds of heart problems, vascular problems, breathing problems as a result, because it's half a degree hotter. It's a degree hotter. The sun shines on you for 20 minutes longer in a day. And you're going to feel it. When you start feeling that, that's how it's impacting you. Don't bother to wait for the news about how the dams in China are collapsing. Because that's going to make you feel, great, I'm in the UK. I don't have to worry about it.
Well, that's the whole purpose of the show, David, is talking about what's going on around the world. So you're basically just saying it's not relevant anymore.
Not at all. What's going on around the world is already happening to you. If you don't anchor it to be able to see how you yourself are affected by the things that are causing these things to cross over, then you see what's going on around the world in the security of a home. I spoke to someone a few years back who was surprising, very educated, smart, great friend, talking along, and he was saying how he has it on the top authority, which was from the British government official statement, internal memos, of how the UK will be fine. And so he's perfectly okay with it as a result.
Well,
he does not see how it's impacting him.
But that's not the news that's coming out of the UK at the moment. Right?
The UK in the news that's coming out is there's a heat wave along and so on, but that's just
No. They're talking about the whole security have this report that they haven't released that's talking about food shortages and major social breakdown, and it's a massive security risk. So anyone who thinks that it's going to happen to somebody over there and it's not going to happen to them is an idiot. Joe, you're about to jump in and say something?
I probably was. I just can't remember what I was going to say now.
Well, I wanted to just bring it back to something a little bit fun. So I have very much enjoyed the whole Count Binface coverage, and what's been really interesting about it is I think one of the BBC stations, one of the radio stations, interviewed him, and they had him on with a galactic background, and it was very funny. But now a whole bunch of other media are picking up and interviewing him live in studio, and it's actually I think it's really talking about the farce of politics at this time. And I know a lot of people in the UK, especially younger people, are just so switched off. And I actually think this is a positive thing to get the kids switched back on. But he's from his manifesto to everything he's saying. I think he's creating a really positive momentum in the conversation, but I think other people think that it's sort of making a fool of politics. But then his whole point is, well, come on, like there was a ironic article or an ironic tweet that the Poke highlighted that who's funding Count Binface, and that was Reform UK asking that question. It's like but like his manifesto, cap croissants at £1 and 99 flakes at 99p. Make water company bosses swim in polluted rivers. Build at least one affordable house. Restore CFAX. I don't know what that is. Make rule. I love this one. I saw one last night. Make rule-breaking cyclists ride unicycles. Abolish VAR, which is value-added tax, right? Build a space bridge at North Ellerton. Invite European countries to join the UK. That's his manifesto, I just think I think it's fun. I think it's generating a conversation and allowing people to use humour to take the piss out of a situation that's just become completely out of hand. I mean, Joe, what's been your impression? Yeah, I'm sure you've enjoyed it.
Well, from the people who brought you Brexit and Bodhi make boat face, I think we can expect some really good work there. Now, actually, what I think is interesting about this, I was actually thinking about if you wrote an article for The Onion, but you wrote only about the Reform Party, it would seem appropriate. So what's different about putting on something like this, which actually catches the attention of the audience? I think what's also interesting is what it could say if the result comes out as interestingly as it could. What it really could say about how real things are on the ground, as in, like, I think Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are a response to the status quo that is basically saying that it's so bad we'll take anything else that seems sort of viable. What I think I think what he creates is actually another option for something that is not what is the usual, and it also gets to say something. And I'm not even kidding when I think about it in terms of Bodhi make boat face. I think this is something very viable for the British audience, the British population to actually vote for. I mean, it's something they would go for a laugh. They'd do it, because I do believe, and I still think that there's a large reason why Brexit happened is quite a few people did it for a laugh.
Yeah, it's just like Trump the first time around. He didn't expect to win, right? And then here we are, second term in. But that earlier point that you made is it's a reflection of the society, and if I look at US politics and what the Democrats are saying, not the left-leaning socialist Democrats, the sort of the standard Democrats, right? I'm like, this is not time for more of the same. Like David was talking about, if we want to keep with the status quo is going to fall over no matter what we do, right? So how do we plan? How do we prepare? And it's politics as usual? No, not going to cut it. We need something quite radical. And I would love for humour and comedy to be in that story too, because I actually think, it's a serious time, but at the same time, we should be able to have a bit of a laugh while we're going through it too, right?
Yeah, it's looking at a mirror and really seeing yourself.
Yeah, having a laugh is really key. Having a laugh is really key. The thing about Nico, so I've been working with Nico on about We're Always Glad You Came. So there's a few other people along and bring it together. And the idea behind it is that if it's not serious enough to joke about it, then it's not serious enough. The whole thing is very lighthearted, and the whole event is games that you go and play and imagine the future, and you're going to have to deal with each other and play along in that way. But the atmosphere and the intention is that you've got to be able to joke about it if it's serious enough. Otherwise, it's just not serious enough. And that's
so why we always. That's why we always have jokes on the shit show, right? We laugh at the serious stuff because you got it, right?
And I think back to good old Binface, right? I grew up with Screaming Lord Sudge, which was the character, the party, at the general elections, who always stood at the general elections. And, it's kind of like intending as a character to go along, and he stood at every election along with the monster raving loony party in that way, which basically kind of a finger up in the air, middle finger to the establishment, to the political establishment, in saying how it is. What is, in some sense, the real question here with Lord Binface, with Count Binface, is whether he's actually going to get elected. I think that's what we really want, because no one else is standing. So, that's really the thing to do.
I'll be
and if he
they're actually
elected,
looking at, but they're actually looking at changing the laws in Parliament so that he can wear his bin into Parliament, because currently you can't have face coverings.
Well, that's his face. I mean, that's his actual face. That's why his name is Binface.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what they voted for, right? Yeah. I know it's all good. All right. So the other big news, of course, this week is I started this week going, I think I was right about Trump with Iran. He just wanted it to go away. And then this week happened, and I think the whole World Cup thing embarrassed the hell out of him. I think there was a lot of things going on at NATO that his ego bristled with, and it's like the psychopathic break. I think we saw that happen. Saying it's all over, we're back at war. There's a piece in CNN Politics. What options does Trump have now in Iran? Not many, and they're all bad. So one, escalate militarily. Well, we've seen how that's gone in many, many other places across the Middle East and across the world. And basically, it will be impossible to take Iran. Impossible. Tighten economic warfare. Yep, great. That impacts all of us and makes everything else worse, including food. Revive negotiations, the MOU. So apparently, it's still ongoing, because that's something he said this week. Walk away, tolerate a contested strait. So that's basically pretty much where we are right now. I wasn't shocked by, I thought maybe, that he was just going along and ignoring the reality, because he just didn't want to have to deal with it anymore. There's no win in this case for him. And then this all happened. I mean, what was your impression? Joe, did you sort of go, or did you go, of course he did?
Well, it was never truly stable to start with. I mean, that's the fundamental part of it, right? Because it was all declarative that it was stable, and yet there was all this backlog that had to be cleared. The ceasefire was never truly a ceasefire. It kept bubbling every now and then, and so in terms of it being really what was happening, I think it was not. I think, if anything, the markets responded the way the markets wanted to respond. Because, I mean, I'm sure David's got lots of experience with this, right? The market just looks for an excuse. The market wants the price to go down. It looks for a reason for that to go, and then they go, we have a consensus, then we can ride the wave down. And now there's a reason for it to go back up again, and we go up, right? I mean, I happened to be trading, or I happened to be watching the charts at the time when that particular tweet went out. And the oil market moved 6%, right? And it was just news. And yet, in truth, if you looked back at what was happening as all these things were being said, as they said there was a ceasefire, and you heard all the transgressions happening, you would have said some time ago, there is no ceasefire. It really isn't a ceasefire. And so now, only because now it's said, oh, there is no peace, then suddenly now the market sort of changes and says, it's the circumstances have changed. But as you've known, the traffic hasn't been free flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. It hasn't actually been settled. It's still a place where the ships, the captains don't want to take their crews through because of the dangers involved. So nothing really was solved before. It was just the news around it that changed. Yeah. So to me, this, as much as people who aren't in a no-go, wow, what a big change. In a sense, I think on the ground, or in the water, if you like, around the area, nothing much had changed.
I think the ship movement was starting to pick up, and I think the ships are still going, by the way. But yeah, to me, it's sort of it makes a mockery of the entire market. You know, has there been any ceasefire that's been called in the last few years? It's actually a ceasefire. There's none. They're all still bombing and killing. But they just say that there's a ceasefire, right? And Gaza's an obvious example of that. But I mean, David, you know, from an economics perspective, or you know, in any other perspective, what do you want to add?
The only thing, I think the real question is, how much is Iran going to matter for the midterm elections? So Iran has allowed the guerrilla warfare, and Trump doesn't know how to deal with that, basically. You know, in the guerrilla warfare, you can't hide behind some walls and then you take a shot and then you go off somewhere else and take another shot. And the establishment is trying to fight in an established way and doesn't know what to do. You can go along and try and bomb them out of their holes or whatever, rat holes or whatever it is, but they just find another one and they take a pot shot at you. That's basically what's going on in that way. Ultimately, what matters is the midterm election. And how much is that going to matter? If winning the Iran war is important to the midterm elections, it's important to giving Trump back a popularity that he wants, much like Margaret Thatcher with the Falkland Wars in that sense, then he will go all in and do something crazy and nasty. Otherwise, he will just let it fizzle. And the chances are with things at the moment, it's not going to matter. It's going to be domestically the cost of oil and stuff, but that's going to be washed away as says, you know, that's just nasty Iranian people. We are going to massively increase production. We increase production in Venezuela. We've broken OPEC. We increase production all around the world in order to go along and bring down the cost of oil. And those sort of messages around will come in place instead. So is Iran itself going to matter to the American people when they go and vote? I doubt it. Can they deal with the message on the cost of living? Last time, Richard and I were talking about Kevin Walsh, the new chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank. Is he going to hike rate? Almost certainly not, in my mind, because I think it's going to be a political decision that's going to drive it. And we're just too close to those critical moments in leading up to that messaging in that way. So what's Trump trying to do at the moment is, how do I spin this within my storytelling? You know, he can either go along, which is the path he's on, and just says, they're bad people, not going to deal with them anymore.
Yeah, but he's got half a year of failed storytelling. He's got a half a year of failed storytelling. No, but like too many of his base don't believe him anymore. You know, he's obviously still got his base that are firm, but there's a very large percentage of people that are like, nah, you're just full of shit, mate. You know, so the spin isn't working.
I think this is where the politics has crossed lanes. I think this is where it's no longer about democracy, but about cronyism. The people who support him have been paid well. The chairman, the head of FIFA, is going to be paid well. That's the message he has. He's not about democratic representation for the better of the country. He's about how, if you support me, you will be paid well.
Yeah, but he's always been like that. Right?
He's been paying huge amounts to different people. He's been pardoning all kinds of people they really shouldn't pardon. You know, the EPA pardon of the guys who've got, you know, bad emissions in their cars. That's his kind of trick and his storytelling, and that's been working well. I think the things that hasn't been working well is when we think, oh, he should really do something, and that's where I think the broadsheet press, in that sense, you know, sort of the thinking press, the analytical press, in saying how his policies have failed and so on. They're still on a world of trying to of thinking politics is about. You look at the 250th anniversary celebration when he showed that video of the Mount Rushmore and his face has taken over Abraham Lincoln. That's his messaging. Whether you like it or whether you think it hits the spot or whatever it is, that first impression is Trump's face is on Mount Rushmore. people are going to be saying, "Oh, did you see Trump's face on Mount Rushmore?" And then someone in the group is going to say, "Yeah, but that's a terrible thing to do." But then the rest of them would just nod at him and then go on and say, "Here, look at the video."
Yeah, I don't think it's as successful as you think it is. Especially when you look at the political divisions between Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, and the story's really in the Independents, and it's massively dropped in favourability. But the story of the war in particular, right from the word go, they didn't have the story straight. They've constantly changed the story. Just this week, they said they've annihilated their nuclear, and apparently that's the whole reason that they're still going in these negotiations. So I'm not as convinced of you. But I wanted to move on to, because the bigger story about outside of this is because of everyone's talking about fuel prices and the cost of living and all that sort of stuff. But the biggest issue that we will feel in the longer term is obviously food insecurity, food inflation, and famine. So because it's not just the impacts of the war and not being able to get the fertilizers out, it's also that we've got this massive El Nino coming. We've got the extreme heat events, like Europe's just been smashed. They're talking in France, it's just the countryside is dead. Birds are dropping dead out of the sky. The farms are not producing food. I saw an Italian story with the tomatoes, all the skins cracking off before they become ripe, right? So, the birds, the chickens are dying, the cows are dying, and then you've got this screwworm coming into the US, and the breeding capacity of the beef industry, lowest since like the 40s or something. Then there's this report out of the UK. The basically UK has no future if it fails to act on ecosystem collapse threatening national security. And this is talking about within the UK, but also globally, how much reliance. What percentage of food is imported into the UK? It's either it grows 62% of its own food or it imports 62%. It's one of those two. But there's a
Either of those two is a problem, right?
Yeah,
because,
exactly. Right.
Which 40% of your meal are you going to do away with?
Yeah, exactly.
If you think about it.
Yeah, and then there's so then they're talking in Thailand. The three big crops that are going to be impacted are obviously rice. We talked about sugarcane and cassava. And total agricultural damage just from the next 12 months based on an El Nino, 1.85 billion, which I was surprised was a very low percentage point of 0.31% of its GDP, but I thought it'd be higher. But basically, farm income's projected to be down. Massive losses, and this is just from one country. And then there's another story talking about the impact of the El Nino, and the strengthening of this El Nino is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it could drive severe drought. So we should be expecting Indonesia is one of the countries that's going to be impacted. So obviously Singapore is going to be impacted. That means Malaysia will be impacted, and Ho Chi Minh will be the hottest city on the planet. If you've ever been to Vietnam, it's extremely hot if you're there in the summertime. So obviously more humidity. It's a humid environment, but more heat, more humidity. I think in the next 12 months, so basically from February next year, I think we're going to see a lot of people die very quickly. There's going to be less rain. We're going to see drought, agricultural losses, food security pressures, which is obviously going to impact social cohesion, water shortages, wildfire risks, and in the tropics, the preparation for wildfires is very, very different to, say, a country like Australia, which is incredibly prepared for wildfires. I think I've told the story where I saw a fire station in Thailand, and I thought it was a museum, and it was actually a living fire station. So yeah, coral bleaching, obviously, the typhoons, and you think of a country like the Philippines is going to get absolutely slammed by them. So yeah, there's a lot coming up, but food security in the next 12 months, 2 years, and it's gonna be hard.
Yeah, and I'm reminded still of Joe's comment last time about crying wolf, right? Wolf.
Yeah.
we will go through this time, and everybody will forget.
Yeah.
So, are you going to forget also? Because everyone around you will forget, and the news cycle will move on, and they'll report about how something else is great. I had this thing about the AI center I was going to say earlier. I walked out of my door the other day, and there's this couple along, and they kind of look like they're in some sort of heated conversation. And I just walked past them. I overheard, and she was saying how she runs a venture fund. They have $150 to $200 million, and they are into data center. She's got these data centers in Poland, and they're building out in Latvia. I was walking past, and I was thinking, okay, so as you walk around the street corner, you hear people pushing data centers as a, it's like saying, oh, we've got a dodgy watch you can have, I've got a fake Rolex or whatever it is that you can have, or whatever that you might hear instead in a different place. And I don't know where that is in the cycle of investment bubble or otherwise, but generally when you hear it on the street corner, you're the last guy to hear it.
Yeah. That's the old bubble. We're right at the edge of the bubble again.
And that is going to come on and take over the news again.
Yeah, well, it kind of never goes away. When you talk about Boy Who Cried Wolf, like the AI bubble conversation has been going on for so long in the media, I don't think people are paying attention to it anymore. So I think when it actually does happen, and isn't it traditionally October when the global economies crash? Isn't that the typical month where it all happens? August.
Everyone's on holiday. The experienced guys are on holiday. The rookies are manning the desks. They don't know how to deal with a sudden drop in liquidity, and the thing collapses.
Okay.
So we have 20 days left to civilization. One show left before we close our season. This is the ultimate.
Maybe we're all right.
It's the ultimate shit show ever.
Yeah, exactly. There was another story, dimming the sun, right? So this is obviously geoengineering. It's been talked about for a long time. So there's one piece in Wired, and I read another piece earlier in the week. Dimming the sun would help lower the risks of El Nino. And basically the thing is, yes, really. So what this comes from is in the last, so I think it was 2019, there was the big fires in Australia, and they released so much smoke, they actually flipped the world back into El Nino. Do you remember us talking about that on the show a long time ago? So it's a nature's sort of geoengineering model. So basically, based on that and what they saw from that, they're looking at geoengineering. So what they do is marine cloud brightening, where they spray fine seawater droplets into low clouds over the tropical Pacific. So that makes them whiter, which means they're more reflective, so they can send more sunlight back out into space, which cools the Earth, right? Now you think about that from a massive scale. So the chances are there will be a massive fire event in Australia this year because everything's drying out. There's no snow. Because all of the different weather events that need to happen to mean reduce snow means that are happening right now in Australia. So it's snowy mountains where I grew up. There's basically no snow, and the El Nino years are really bad for snow in those mountains. So Australia is going to be dry as tinder when this summer comes up, and obviously we're going to have the Americas, that's South America, the Amazon. Probably from October will be hit first, and then the Australian sort of New Zealand sort of continent comes into it, and then the next heat event will be February, which is Asia. So that's kind of the cycle throughout the year, right? We've got Europe and the North America right now, then it'll be the South America, then it'll be Australia, New Zealand, and then Asia. That's how the annual heat sort of seems to operate around the world. So David?
I think it's important to note that this sort of geoengineering, there's a company called Make Sunsets. So the idea is what happens as you fill the atmosphere with mostly sulfur dioxide is in the thing, and incidentally, sulfur dioxide release is the mechanism that's described in that book everybody quotes about Ministry of the Future. As the way that India went to go about to create cooling. So it's suggested in the book as entirely legitimate. The company is called Make Sunsets because that's what it does. It blocks out the sun so that it looks like permanent sunset. So you never see the full sun ever in your life. or
exactly,
your children.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the point about it is that they are operating. They released some in Mexico back in a few years ago, and Mexico tried to ban them from operating there. The US has said, there's not enough science to operate on this, the EPA, but hasn't formally banned it as such. There's always a place in the world where you can release this thing and take it up. And so while we talk about as to whether it should happen or not, our economic system allows them to just carry on and do this. And the way their operating model is, you pay them a bit of money, they release a balloon on your behalf, and then you can be blocking out a bit of the sun for you. So that the real question is, do you want to live in a world where there is never any sun and only ever sunsets? Do you want your children grow up in such a world? Because once it goes up there, it's never going to go away. Forget about all the other impacts as to what it may have. Who knows what the other impacts we may have? The essence,
no, it will go away. It does go away. That's why it has to. You have to keep putting it up
in a very long sort of time in that sort of stuff. It stays around, the essence.
But then you have. But if you let it clear, then you've got a termination shock. So,
yeah. So you need to wait, right? Because it's but the essence. But the point is the thing that it doesn't talk about is what Yang Zhongshou mentioned along in there. The heat is already baked in. You can stick a big umbrella over the earth and block out the sun completely. The heat is already in the oceans. And when it burps, which is what the El Nino is, and it's going to carry on doing that, you're still going to get all of those devastations along. So we focus in all of these things on how we can somehow imagine it coming better and then everything will be back okay. It won't. So you got to kind of embrace the fact that it is changed. It has already changed. We've gone past that point. So start thinking about how you thrive in such a way. Kind of had to come down here, for example, today to take my laptop down here because it's the only cool place in the house. What I do about the rest of the house. How do I become more resilient to the fact that it's just going to be sticky and uncomfortable for the rest of my life? Does that mean I won't be able to thrive? Or does it mean I'll just be able to accept that as what it is? Because there are people who live like that around the world, and I used to when I grew up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or when I was growing up.
I'm just looking for an article to share. No, are you going to speak, Joe?
I was trying to come up with some kind of witty rejoinder to things, but I haven't quite got it. I was doing some extra research, by the way. So the UK is going to be screwed in terms of food in a number of ways because about 40 to 50% of your total food is consumed by value is actually imported, and depending on the kind of food, it's more you're more dependent than others. So when it comes to tomatoes, 85% from the EU. That's especially during winter, and in winter, 90% of your lettuce comes in from outside. So yeah, lots of dependency on the food in there. And I've been watching, of course, on the other side, what's been happening with Jeremy Clarkson and friends, and it seems like the UK government is against its own farmers in terms of how they have set up the taxes. And well, they're not penalties per se, and they're supposed to try. It's supposed to impact richer people. But the way they've drawn those lines seem to have been incorrect, and so it's affecting the average farmer, making it impossible really for the average farmer to make ends meet. So the people who could produce the UK's food don't have the ability to produce the food in a way that makes sense economically.
Yeah, and that's a global thing. But Jeremy Clarkson's an interesting one. So he was the great climate denier, and he was an absolute arsehole. Like anytime you heard him on, talking about it, right? And so he obviously just recently announced his cancer diagnosis, but he's also becoming a climate champion just in the recent months, because he's like, well, I was obviously wrong. He actually admitted it, but which I found it's interesting, because if you're working the farm, there's no way you can't see it, and so I think his flip, whether you like him or not, and a lot of people don't like him because he's an interesting character. I'm just sharing an article called "On Climate Denial and Free Market Fundamentalism," and I just read it this week. Did you guys have a chance to have a look at it? It's a bit of an in-depth conversation with Naomi Oreskes. I don't know how to say it. Who's written a couple of books that are worth. I can't remember where they'll be here somewhere. But anyway. I found it really, really interesting, right? So it's the difference between this concept of freedom and the freedom of government, of business to make the right decisions, right? So their freedom versus government. So it's the big government, small government conversation. I've just shared it here. It's too long probably for us to talk about based on the amount of time we got left. But what I found really interesting, so one of the references that they use is child labour. So when child labour was first discussed and policies were being put forward to stamp it out, business people fought that. And you think, how would anyone argue against 3-year-old, 8-year-old dying in a factory, right? But it was the freedom of business people to make the decision that they were fighting against. And I just found that a really interesting insight. And so basically her and her co-author went back to lots of different scenarios and looked at this kind of concept of, businesses have the right to make their decisions, right? But it doesn't look at how those decisions impact us. If they're polluting the river that we live on, then we have polluted water, and we have no freedom in that situation. So it's just a really good perspective, because it goes back to sort of pre-war, post-war, sort of the concept of freedom and where we are today, and also how it's embedded in the conversation that's been happening ever since. And the reality is we as in the people, are continually losing out to these decisions and these trusts that we're putting in these organizations that run the world, are polluting the world. And there is no responsibility to us and our lifestyles. And I think historically, I call it the bullshit industries, right? Or the inshitification of business. So there was a time when all of the inshitification was happening out of sight, but eventually everything grows and grows and grows so that it ends up in your backyard. So when there was first waste on the beaches in Asia, we all saw it because of the colonial dumping of waste. We all saw it, but eventually, once it gets in the water, it's going to come back to your shores. And now it's back on the shores in the wealthy countries that keep shipping it to our shores, right? So it's the inshitification of business. Eventually, it's going to get home, and I think that's the period that we're in right now. We're in the period where you can't deny the impacts, because they're on your doorstep now. Before, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, they were somewhere else on the other side of the planet, but now they're on your doorsteps, and you can't ignore it anymore. I don't know. I love the inshitification sort of model.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of an interesting central point in some sense, right? Because we buy the stuff, comes back, it ends up piling up over our doorsteps, and all the rest of it. What I talk about is basically that agency ourselves to then sort of says, you know what, either it's in terms of I don't need to buy the stuff, I don't want to buy the stuff, or I'm going to do something about that is piled up over my thing. And to the extent of whether that then extends to actually shouldn't pile up anywhere at all, or whether it just shouldn't pile up into my stuff, my thing is just kind of another decision that we make along the way. And and all of these choices, each one of these choices is fundamentally breaking down the lanes that we've been brought up in. If you think even most simply, just the thing about we buy the stuff, we're brought up into thinking we buy the stuff. That's kind of our education process, how the economy works, how this works. That's kind of how we get rewarded for getting an A grade. We get to go and buy some stuff in that way. So in many ways, I think what you're pointing out is for me, I take it further and sort of says, look, forget about any of these boundaries and lanes and stuff. What is it that you would want? if it were kind of a blank page in that way. Then how can you be true to what you are and act in a way that allows you to live closer to that without landing you in jail, but still with people, engaging with people? And this is the point about, and build an economic presence, build a presence of people actually reward you for being there around them in that way. In some ways, that's where all the extreme politics that we talk about has gone. People have gone along and says, well, here's how I build my presence. I advocated by saying this and that, and if you vote for me, I can do that, and you can finance me and provide me in that way. The difference there is on the basis of a promise. And what this sanctification falling onto your doorstep is really saying that we can't afford to wait for promises. The time is kind of, that time for waiting is already over. It's piling on us. We can't really wait to see whether Count Binface wins the election and goes on and takes over Parliament, or whether Nigel Farage wins it and takes it into crap in that way. We kind of have to see what can we start doing ourselves. How can we organize ourselves, the people we're around? What you talk about, what they do in precarity in Asia and all of those things.
Well, how we live, how we live. I listen to a lot of people talking about dreams, property dreams, and I know, and I can't say anything because no one wants to listen to this message, but I'm like, people who are struggling, all I want is this. And I'm like, well, why don't you think about it in a different way? Is there a collective way that you can live in a community where people in a similar situation to you can come together and you can live together and sort of take care of each other, rather than this, the American dream, the Australian dream, the Singapore dream, the 5 Cs, the British dream, whatever the equivalent is where everyone lives, right? The world doesn't have enough resources for everyone to live the dream. It just doesn't.
Well, what I want is to be able to go to anywhere at some point, sort of as the world collapses into shit and all of that, and be able to go into community where people will say, we're always glad you came. That's what I want. That's why the games are called We're Always Glad You Came.
Right. Yeah, I'd like that. At the moment, I think I turn up and people go, oh, shit, Andrew's here. All right, so there's a great piece by Monbiot talking about heat stress denial. So rich people who are the politicians making the decisions, the business leaders making decisions, and the media moguls who are sending out climate denial information and telling people, what are you overreacting for? And actually, the difference between the heat wave in 1976 and today is massively humidity, which is much deadlier. But the people who are spreading the denial message, or kids should be able to go to school, sort of stuff. They're okay because they can afford the energy required to cool their homes, whereas the people that they're saying you got to stiff upper lip, they're the people who don't have the money and the resources and the schools and the infrastructure and the hospitals that can help them if they get into trouble from extreme heat. Please don't be a dickhead with extreme heat, or you will spend the rest of your life in kidney dialysis units, because that's one of the things that gets damaged. So we've just got a couple more minutes, but we were talking about Typhoon Maysak, which hit the Mariana Islands. We're not getting a lot of information out of there. Apparently one of the communication towers went down, but it's on its way. Well, it's probably hitting Japan and Taiwan now, but then it's on its way to China sort of overnight tomorrow. But the landslide that happened in Mumbai, there's loads of landslides going on because, of course, it's been dry. Now there's massive monsoonal dump. But the Mumbai-Pune missing link, which I think is a really interesting name anyway. So this is a really important roadway between Mumbai and Pune, where it's a commuter belt basically, and a lot of people that I work with in Mumbai live in Pune, which is a beautiful little place. I'm sure it's a lot different to what I visited back in the 90s, but it only opened 2 months ago, so it got a whole big chunks of it sort of washed away with landslides, and I'm sure the politicians are going, woohoo, we can double dip on this one. But it's been immense amount of water has dropped in the Maharashtra state. Any other big ones apart from obviously the fires that are crashing across Europe.
I was just going to say, just in terms of indicators, right? When you do a search on Google, when you key in a few keywords in your search, you usually see the autocomplete and stuff like that, right? So I was just doing that just to find out more about the Mumbai landslides. I actually completely typed everything, and there still wasn't an autocomplete for landslide. So it basically just says, I mean, the information came up in the search, but in terms of the information being searched for, about people having a discussion about it just shows you that really it's so much off the map. And then when you hear about the size of the problem, is really one of those things. It's like, for me, I had the same experience with the China tornadoes. Right? I mean, it was one of those things where I had seen literally the word China tornado in a conversation. It went by. I hadn't gone deeper into it to have a look and see what it was about. But I must confess to not actually jumping in and seeing it. And finally, when I did, I was mortified.
Yeah.
And you can and that sort of thing can happen somewhere in the world, and there's another part of the world that just has completely no idea that happened. Right? It's like someone getting a red card in a game you have no understanding about.
But you can cancel it.
It's a really important point, Joe, because I mean, I obviously keep an eye on major significant weather events to put in the news feed. And India is obviously a country that I'm looking at for extreme heat, for flooding, for the massive landslides that happen up in the Himalayas. So I've always got something in my feed automatically. China's a different story. They can have it could be weeks after a major event before any news gets out. So the recent impact in the last week, something did pop up on YouTube that week for me, and I was like, wow, okay, this, because I knew it was happening, but I was struggling to find any information on it. So I don't know, maybe China's being a little bit, maybe whatever the rules are, or is it a communication failure, or are there people in the country now that are just actively trying to communicate what's actually happening more? I don't know what's changed, but it is very difficult to get information out of China from an extreme weather event perspective. They I don't know. It's changing, but it's only recently that I've seen it change. But India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, terrible story on the BBC today about all these babies dying in Bangladesh from the measles, and it's just it's just so. You see these little people, they're 4 months old, 6 months old, 7 months old, and then five minutes later in the story they'll tell you the baby that you've just been looking at died. Completely unnecessary. There's just not enough measles vaccines in the country. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know if it's part of the USAID funding loss. 1,200 babies have died, something like that. It's really, really high numbers, and it's completely unnecessary because it's bloody measles. It's curable,
Yeah, but I mean, I think we're going to have lots of little sort of pop-up news in some ways, and it goes along through, and who knows what the reasons for one thing or another is. The thing to take away really is that things are not going to be easy for anyone anywhere in the world. Getting out of your comfort zone into that discomfort zone is going to be very important to do in a way that's positive for you, in a way that you are engaging with it rather than being thrown out into it and being forced into it. And that's a mindset situation more than anything or whatever it may be. And if you're taking action, check whether that action is in a way to say, I am actually trying not to accept that things are going to have to change on me. So that's why I'm taking this action so they can stay the same. Or whether you're taking action as in I'm accepting that things are going to change. That's why I'm taking this action in that way. And we do a lot of, we cross between the two, I myself and everyone, we cross between the two all the time. But the more you can get into kind of accepting that things are going to change, you're going to change and everything else is going to change, the more you kind of take a different view to how your politics is, to how your business is, to how your kind of spirituality is in what you take from that. And you know, whether you see the news out of China, is it significant if there's no news out of it, or there's a lot of news out of it, and all of those things? They're all part of the changes that are going on. Who knows? We can't tell. That's also great about the butterfly wing thing from Lorenz. And what he began is this study of saying, you know, the boundaries. It's not that it's a small effect can become a big effect, but that things stay in their lane. But certain situations cause the lanes to break. So what are those things? And whatever those things are, I think what we're all saying is we are in the middle of those now. And so those lanes are going to break. So everybody's still driving in their lanes. Everything still looks perfectly okay until there's an accident or something. And then all of a sudden you find you're actually driving on the opposite side of the road because that central reservation has just been taken out. Or whatever, or the car on the other side of the road is just driving where you are. So it's a difficult time, but it's also highly possible because all the things that you then talk about in in the activities that you have and so on, they become ways to actually say, well, take it that step further and make it possible. Because all those boundaries and things have weakened. So, you know, but when you do that, be careful. You know, you got to be very thrifty about the resources you use because you're going to need them again later.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just want to finish with where am I? I'm going to put my overshoot challenge. I've got 171 people participating in the overshoot challenge, and my goal is to reach 1 billion. So I'm a long way off. So I'm going to put it in here. Joe, have you set up an account in the overshoot challenge?
You shall continue to shame me on this show until I do, I'm sure.
I will.
Yeah, as you should. As you very much should, yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to share one final story, and it was really interesting. So in Discover magazine, there was an article, 6 years after the first COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, billions of doses clarify their protection and rare risks. And Joe, we were smack bang in the middle of COVID when we first started this show. It was when the US left Afghanistan. And we've talked a lot about COVID vaccine. You've done a lot of reporting on the science. When I saw this article shared, I think I picked it up on Facebook, there was you could see there was a bunch of laughy emojis, right? The cynicism is strong in the anti-vax, anti-mRNA story. But I thought it was a pretty interesting insight. What did you kind of take away from it?
Okay, I'll confess to not having read the article. I've
summarized it.
If you can go with it. I mean, I'm up to date with the science, but I didn't catch this particular article.
Okay. So I'll give you a quick summary. So basically there were billions of shots because of COVID, which means that they've had 5-6 years now of data collection from impacts, and basically found they were very highly effective at reducing severe illness, hospitalization, and death. Protection was found across groups, including children, pregnant people, and immunocompromised people. Boosters and updated formulations help maintain protection. There was a big thing about it would change your DNA. That's not true. It's adaptable, and it's also being used, and there's lots of breakthroughs looking around in the areas of influenza, RSV, cancers, and other conditions. One of the negative risks, side effects, is myocarditis in younger males, and so we heard that a few young men died of myocarditis. But as an overall, yes, there's a couple of side effects, but it's very, very minimal. There's always going to be side effects no matter what you do. But I think, it's a positive sign. And then you hear in the US, they're sort of pulling back on funding for anything to do with mRNA. But it seems like the rest of the world's going gung-ho, right?
Well, I mean, the thing about the stats is that, okay, so you talk about these numbers and these are way after the fact, but even while it was in progress, whenever you looked at the infection rates or the hospitalization rates, it was always very clear
Yeah.
It's 90% of hospitalizations were from the unimmunized cohort. So it was very clear there was a correlation there, and it was you couldn't say there was no effect. But the understanding of it, the comprehension of it, is such that you have the exceptions to the rule. Simply, and this is why COVID's often been described like the perfect disease. It has enough what do you call them, asymptomatic response in it to cause that whole other psychological problem in terms of disease control as well. Like, if you have Ebola, it's pretty clear you have Ebola. It's not going to be one of those things. It's like with COVID, you can have COVID and nothing happens, and you can go like, hey, look, nothing happened to me. So I'm proof positive that this doesn't work or this doesn't matter, whatever it is, right? And all the trouble I've gone through is for nothing. So that's psychologically and in terms of a culturally designed disease, which is why there's so much talk about it being designed as a disease. And I want to take that off the table. It's very, very likely it had its beginnings in nature. It's very, very likely they were studying extensively in labs. It's possible that there was an outbreak that happened because of a lab leak, but I think it's very unlikely that it was designed. That's the thing that I want to stand on. But when it comes to vaccinations, that's the whole thing. It's like it's hard to comprehend because people don't have a sense of what vaccinations are supposed to do, and also because, and this is why I'm actually doing courses for universities right now to help people with science communication, so that people can help other people understand how the science of COVID worked. The science of vaccinations for COVID, literally, it was evolving because you had an evolving disease. You had an evolving disease, and you had a vaccine that was chasing after that sort of thing. And the disease, by the nature of nature, is that it tries to evade the vaccine, right? So when there's a vaccine, it covers this particular this particular kind of infection. The mutation that is able to escape that is what will then become the next wave of infection. So it evolved, and so the nature of the vaccine from being very good at preventing the disease then changed in terms of being good for helping to make the disease less serious, but couldn't necessarily stop the spread. Those things happen because of the evolution and the science and the math, actually. So I was actually sitting in the audience as a mathematician was talking about the math of vaccinations and herd immunity and stuff like that. And it's still not understood. And the trouble right now, what we have is we have the distribution of information without the license needed to distribute it.
Yeah. It's been a journey, this one, and I just think the people who think this, who are anti-vaxxers and all that sort of stuff, and there's plenty of people in my life who are anti-vaxxers, but I just feel for the science. Okay, so there's just two more stories. There's a massive landfill fire in Indonesia, and our friend Toby, who was on the show, talking about the work he's doing with food and with his machines. They're going from strength to strength, which I'm really happy about in Bali. And the final question we asked was, is Mitch McConnell dead? So this is a really interesting story if you don't know. So he went into hospital 3 weeks ago. Apparently they were working on him, pumping his heart as he was coming out. But the important thing is, by August, so he went into hospital. His wife went to China the next day. But he needs to be confirmed dead before August the 3rd, because then somebody else can put themselves forward for his seat in the Senate. And Massey, who was the Republican that got voted out with one of Donald Trump's guys, could potentially put himself forward as an independent for the state, where he'd probably get the vote. But it has to happen. But But after the August the 3rd, they could potentially. That nobody else can put their name forward. So they think that he's dead on machines.
Effectively, you think about effectively dead, but we get the mind to prevent the vote.
Yeah. So that's the story that's
This
going
is
on.
so, this is so much like the days when it's the Chinese premier or the Russian premier dead, or it's just.
But this is
it's
actually
interesting
happening.
how. I know. Isn't it bizarre how the politics has gone around from, kind of, you expect it out of a country like, those sort of authoritarian countries, because they were trying to maintain, ensure that they have the right control. And here it is. The reason you want to make sure that you don't lose the seat, or you don't lose the.
Mitch McConnell, for everyone who doesn't know, is an American Republican politician who's been a very big ally of Trump, even though Trump hates him now. But he has been an important member of the Republican Party to get Trump's agenda moving forward in the first round and in this round. So he's a significant player. I don't know. I know far too many names in the bloody American politics. I got to tell you. Steve's like, who's Mitch McConnell? I'm like, oh God, I should.
Well, for me, he's always going to be the guy who's going to be famous for having his screensaver come on while he's on camera, as in, like, I think that was he's the one who froze up in the middle of an interview, completely had an episode. Wasn't that him?
Could have been. There's a memory being tickled in the back of my mind. But yeah, that sounds kind of fun. I mean, apparently he's had 3 strokes in the last few years. So it's like, come on. But then you look at that average age of politicians in the US and late 70s, 80s. It's like, just go away and let the young people come in. Like, what the hell are you guys hanging around for? Like, it's just that. I think there should be a limit on anyone in public life. I think there should be a limit. And right now we should be letting the young people run the show because it's their future. Anyway, what's been keeping you guys distracted?
So refining the game for me. We're always glad you came. So I think I've got the basic format. So I now need to play it, and then need to get myself out there, try to invite people. These are meant to be paid events. People pay for it, much like you spend an afternoon in Disneyland. So kind of idea.
All right, sounds good. All right, Joe?
I have been spending what looks like way too much time watching TikTok. Now, I will say that I'm doing it for research, because that's really how I operate. I'm actually studying the successful live TikTok people, the ones who run it live and are doing it live, seeing what content works, see how the engagement works. And I am working on the idea. Not sure if I can pull it off, but I am working on an idea to have a radio station that is run on TikTok. So to try and launch a kind of a morning show again in Singapore. I mean, I used to really enjoy doing that when I was on the radio, and I'm tempted as a project to try and do it and see what happens. So look out for it if I'm successful with that. I might also end up selling stuff on TikTok just to discover how that works, because TikTok is one remarkable platform. It's one it's one of those places where the monetization process is so much. I think it's so much better designed than some of the others. Like, for YouTube, you have to build an audience, qualify for this before you can even begin to do anything else, right? TikTok, the bar is a lot lower. You can set up your own store, and if you can convince the 5 people who watch you to buy something from you, you can start making some money. So I'm very curious about how that whole thing can work. I was going to actually try and stream this on TikTok, but I didn't have time to put it together. I might try and do this. So we might make our debut on TikTok next week as I try to stream this feed.
We need to set it up, the other way.
Oh no, I can. TikTok actually can do landscape as well. So it's it's something that's it's possible and doable. The question is, of course, whether or not this is going to get any kind of traction at all on the platform. But it doesn't matter. It's just something to try and learn, from.
Yeah. No.
It'll be very different from what I usually stream on TikTok.
Yeah.
What do you usually stream on TikTok?
Well, so far what I've been doing is I've done a few things about, well, one time trading. One time it was just talking about philosophies of life. The other time I've been playing some music and just going through some of the best music I think has been around. So one of the things that I try to focus on is good quality sound. I know it sounds like it's not a big deal, but I try to have something that sound. If you're playing music, it should sound good, and if you speak, it should sound good. And sort of, so it is what radio should sound like on TikTok, and it's usually what you don't get from the other channels. It's not all that important, I think, in the grand scheme of things, but it's an aesthetic that I try to, meet.
Yeah, no, I have respect for the sound. Our speakers in our home are always high quality. They have to be. When my boys play music on their phones, I'm like, turn that off right now. Never play music through a phone. Have
you children not heard of bass?
Yeah, exactly. So I started watching. I watched a funny movie last weekend. It was a new one, but I can't remember what it was. Oh no, I know what it was. It was John Cena. There's a new movie with John Cena in it, and it's one of the guys from Jackass apparently, and it's really inappropriate. But I can't remember what it is, so I'll have to remember it. But I was talking about rewatching Game of Thrones, so I decided instead to start watching The House of Dragon. Have you guys watched that yet? The House of Dragon?
No.
Right. So it's like the story before, like nearly 200 years before. Watched it over a couple of nights, about 4 or 5 episodes, and then by the second night or the third night, I was having such vivid dreams. I was waking up exhausted. So I was like, all right, I'm going to have a break from it, because it's your typical sort of gruesome, axes in the face, weird character sort of stuff. But The House of Dragon, I do recommend it. But not if you get into any sort of binge watching, I think it sort of starts to mess with your mind and your dreams and your sleep.
Okay. I'm going to help you with your recommendation. The movie you're trying to remember is Little Brother.
Yeah. It's very wrong, but very good.
I also recommend this series called Manpuku. It's on Netflix. It's in Japanese. It's about the guy who invented instant noodles.
Okay.
It's got to be the greatest guy in the world.
Are you an instant noodle man?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
well,
really?
Asian. I mean, come on, Asians. We all eat instant noodles. This is like
what's the how do you spell that? I'm having trouble finding or looking for it.
Manpuku.
Oh, Mantuku. Okay.
Yeah, so it's in Japanese, but it's subtitled, and it's 15 minutes episodes.
Wow.
So it is not just snippets.
I avoid noodles in pot like the plague. But anyway, I appreciate the obsession for them in Asia. But yeah, no. MSG, additives, chemicals. Anyway, thanks guys for being here. Look, see, it's so easy even with 3 of us. There's pieces we didn't get to, but I think we got through most of it. Next week, Joe, do you want to tell us quickly about our guest next week?
Well, next week we have someone that I've met through that LinkedIn pod that I'm part of, and he is the China Whisperer. So Kenny likes to bring insights into China, dealing with China, attitude, mindsets. He's been sharing a lot of interesting content on LinkedIn, which take you into the other side of China. So a lot of people go into China trying to do business with the way they've been doing business. And you've always heard that you can't always do that. I think what Kenny does is he tells you exactly why. So you can figure out, you can see, he'll talk about some examples, I'm sure. But we can always talk about all the different things right now and try to understand a bit of the politics as well, because I mean, all of it is linked together, right? There is this thing about, I think we were talking earlier about Western politics versus Eastern politics. And I actually think that the labels perhaps are wrong. It's not really about Western versus Eastern. I think it's about effective versus ineffective. So
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think out the east, there's plenty of ineffective examples, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
So the examples,
I think
the examples are wide and varied. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think especially in today's world, we have to be wary. We're not going to get to the effective without going through the ineffective. So so the issue isn't avoiding the ineffective, but understanding what that means for us.
We're surrounded by the ineffective, David. We have been for years, but there's
so it's about understanding what that means, because if we only try to do the effective, because I think what we're trying to do is only do the effective and not appreciating what we're learning from the ineffective. And so what happens?
I think the one thing you could reintroduce to Western politics that would really help make things better is the guillotine.
Yeah. I was reading about the French Revolution, and
the French would do it.
They chopped off a lot of heads. All right, we will see you next week. Thanks everyone for joining us. Really appreciated it. And so China next week and whatever else we can cover. All right.
All right. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Ta-ra.
Bye. Ta-ra.